Will Goldstein here from thekingscourt.com. And again, there's always a chance to subscribe by hitting that button down there. So I'm beginning a new series. This one's kind of fun, and although it's basically the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, and might even be some comedy in this one, but it's the world of demons and the devil and the way that he plays with the human mind. And it's really an intriguing read. And so I'm just going to start with that. This is lesson 1. Again, I'm a musician. You can always check out my music at thekingscourt.com or links at this site. Sheet music, PDF books, and digital albums. Anyway, so I'm going to start a little bit with the preface, because there's just a few things to say in the preface. And there are two equal and opposite errors humans can have, or we can have, about the devils. One is to disbelieve, and the other is to believe and have an unhealthy interest in them. They are equally pleased by both errors, that is, the demons are. Remember that the devil is a liar. Not everything that Screwtape says should be assumed to be true that he says in this book. And a little bit about this book, the Screwtape Letters. Screwtape is the uncle, and he's sending messages to his nephew, which is Wormwood, and he's giving him advice on how to deal with all his patients. And so there's going to be a lot of different tricks. So if you're trying to figure out what's going on in your mind with all the tricks and all the deception that's going on and why you're so confused, then this is an excellent book for you to become aware of all those kinds of tools that the demons and the devil use to exploit the human mind and to captivate the human mind for, as Screwtape says, their father below, the devil. So I'm going to begin now, and again, this is from Uncle Screwtape to his nephew Wormwood. In guiding your patient's reading, take care that he sees a good deal of his materialist friend. So he's got a materialist friend. Again, materialism is an emphasis on the physical world instead of the spiritual world. In other words, there's even denying the existence of the soul. A few centuries earlier, humans knew when a thing was proved and when it was not. They were prepared to alter their way of life as the result of a chain of reasoning. With weapons we have nowadays, we've largely altered that. Your man has a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing around in his mind, and he doesn't think of them as true or false. They're just different ideas that some of them might be academic, practical, outworn ideas, or contemporary ideas. In other words, it's nothing about really the truth. It's just ideas, conceptions of what the truth is. Jargon is your best ally in keeping him from the church. Make him think that materialism is strong, courageous, the philosophy of the future. Argument moves the whole struggle onto the enemy's own ground. Now, in this, of course, the enemy is God, because this is Screwtape writing this. So if you argue, then God can get into the equation, and so God can argue too, or the angels can argue too. By arguing, you awake reason, logic, thinking, the rational mind. Yeah. So and then if that happens, then who can foresee the result? They might lose their patient, he calls them. So your business is to fix his attention on the stream, and that is the stream of stuff that's going through his mind on what's happening in the world around it. He calls it the real life. And don't let him ask what real means, though. And of course, this is not real, because everything in the world is, when we go back to the ancient world, the world is passing. We're all in a constant state of flux. So this isn't real, actual real. What is real is what is actually in the immaterial world, the spiritual world, that is eternal in a sense. Angels are real. God is real. Angelic beings, they are all real. Humans live and we die. Remember, the human is not a pure spirit, but enslaved to the pressures of the ordinary. He's talking about the life. Get him involved in thinking about all the stuff that he has to do for today, and not about anything of any consequence. And then he goes on to talk about a patient that he had who was an atheist. Screwtape is saying this. He had a patient who was an atheist. I saw his thoughts, and it was starting to go the wrong way. And of course, going the wrong way for Screwtape means that he was starting to have second thoughts about being an atheist, and he was starting perhaps to think about the Holy One, which of course would be God, or you could say Jesus. I saw 20 years of my work beginning to totter. If I began a defense by argument, I would have been undone. And I wasn't really that big of a fool to do such things. I wasn't a fool, he says. So I suggested it was about time for him to go have lunch. Diversion. The enemy made, of course, that's the God or the angelic beings, the good angels, made the counter suggestive that this was more important than lunch. In other words, they're trying to get the atheist to stay on focus. You're on the right track now. And and of course that Screwtape added, well, it's much better to come back after lunch and go into it with a fresh mind. In other words, diversion. Once he was in the street, well, the battle was won. He diverted his attention away from things that mattered. And he got him to start thinking again about the real life. And then, of course, then he would come to the realization, and it would show him that all this sort of stuff, it couldn't possibly be true. The inarticulate sense for actuality is our safeguard against mere logic. The demons don't want you to use mere logic, because if you really deal with mere logic, they're going to lose. And of course, once that happens and they divert you away, then the idea is he's now safe in our Father's house, the devil. And thanks to the processes set at work in them centuries ago, remember that these are demons, they've been around for centuries, they find it impossible to believe in the unfamiliar while the familiar is before their eyes. So they've been doing this for a long time. Just keep their familiar. Don't get them to think about things spiritual and the unseen world. Get them to think about the world around them, materialism. Keep pressing the ordinariness of things. Don't attempt to use science, interesting, he says this, as a defense against Christianity. Why? Because the scientists today know that Christianity is a very viable option, or at least the spiritual world is. A lot of scientists are coming to the belief, that famous ones, that the universe and the world couldn't exist without God. Don't use science as a defense against Christianity. They will encourage him to think about realities he can't touch and see. Again, the immaterial world. Keep him on things like economics and sociology. Don't let him get away from the real life. Just keep him attached to real life. Give him a grand idea that he knows it all. In other words, get him puffed up on his pride and keep him studying all these things that are really are earthly things and maybe even valuable things, but not the real essence of what's important in life, and that's the spiritual world. So I have some things that I'm going to, again, reflect on that even a little bit more. So this is something I wrote, this kind of like a response to this, or demons. Might be sound upstairs. They're having a party. Demons are immaterial spirit, fallen beings under the headship of their father below, we call the devil, and a chain of command of dark principalities and powers that we know the names of some of them. We've heard names like Lucifer, Satan, Beelzebub, Astaroth, Abaddon, and Mammon, and those are just a few of them. Some of these are mentioned in the Old Testament, some are mentioned in the New Testament. The point I'm trying to make is that they've been dealing with humanity for a long time, and they are full of tricks, and they have seen in the past the power of Christianity and the influence it had on the human mind to people who used reason as a proof of something. So because of that, humans were prepared to change their ways when they came to the conclusion that something was true versus false. And this is not to the advantage of the demons. They want to divert away from that. Also, throughout history, different philosophies have come about. A long chain of philosophies all the way back to pre-Plato and people like Thales and Heraclitus and Parmenides, Aristotle, and all the way up to the present time, and they each have their own set of ideas. But you have to remember that by diverting the human mind's attention to these are an attempt to discover the truth. That's what these philosophies are about, as they try to find truth in God, not by divine revelation, which is a way that God has revealed truth in the Bible, but they're trying to find it through philosophy, through their human intellect. And so because of this, they don't all agree. And so the demon's best option is to keep them searching for something other than divine revelation, all these different philosophies, these different ideas, that their best option is to fight against the power of the church. Stay away from divine revelation. I've read a lot of philosophies, and there can be a lot of interesting philosophies, but they're always secondary to divine revelation. And some of them will have some truth for sure. Augustine supported the idea, I might have said before, that, if philosophies are giving the truth, then of course we should support the ideas where they're in sync with what Scripture says and they're not contradictory. Since the objective of the demons is to lead a person away from God, they use materialism as the best option, meaning basically a disbelief in the immaterial world of spirits which we cannot see, and God, of course, because materialism was all about nature and the body, and it's all like pantheism and things like that, and in opposition to the soul. And so by keeping their mind fixed on that as something that's new and courageous and wonderful, the current philosophy of the future, so then that moves them away from God. The demons also don't particularly want to debate or argue ideas, because once you argue, then a human intellect can start to use his mind to formulate ideas about God. He can start to use the human intellect to convince the mind about the existence of God. So if the demons start an argument, then God may use his angels to answer that argument, and so their best tactic is to avoid arguing altogether. The answer to this for the demons, it is best to fix the attention of the human mind on a steady stream of the reality of life. In other words, all the distractions in life, so that humans who are not pure spirit can be enslaved in the ordinary things that are around them in life. And as long as they're constantly diverted in their attention, that takes their mind off God. Screwtape gives an example of one of his patients, an atheist, who is very fixed in his ways, and Screwtape saw this train of thought that was going on in this man's mind. Perhaps he was coming around to the idea that God really does exist, and that he is on the wrong way. And of course, to the demon, Screwtape, he is moving in the wrong direction because he's moving towards the Holy One. So Screwtape began to fret because he saw the 20 years of work that was going to be lost, and he knew that he shouldn't enter into an argument because he would lose. So what he did was, he saw that the man was entering into these thoughts. He diverted his attention. It's time for lunch. Time to go have a feast. And of course that takes his mind off what he was thinking about, and something that was really serious, and then he goes off to lunch, and then of course the battle was won because the atheist would probably forget and be diverted into someplace else, and he wouldn't remember what he was thinking about that was important earlier. A simple suggestion, that sort of thing couldn't possibly be true, was enough to keep this atheist back on track with the demons. The last thing that Screwtape wants to do is to allow his patient to use logic, because logic could lead to losing his patient, and his prime concern is to keep his patient safe in his father's house, which is of course the devil. These demons have been doing this for a very long time, for centuries in fact, and they have convinced many a mind to keep their eyes focused on the familiar, and that distracts them from the unfamiliar, which is of course the spiritual world. Their primary objective is to keep their patients involved in the ordinary things of life. We hear a lot these days about the sciences and how famous scientists have been atheists. However, it's also apparent that in today's society, there are great scientists who, after studying, they have come to the conclusion beyond any shadow of a doubt that God and the spiritual world is real by actually using science. In this particular chapter by C.S. Lewis, Screwtape says to keep them away from science, and I think, meaning, the reason is exactly what I just said, because science ultimately proves the existence of God. Look, if science proves something, then it's rational. God is a rational God. So of course, everything in the end that is true in science is going to coexist with God and revelation. The best alternative for the demons is to keep the human mind on real life and keep him studying something like economics or sociology, make him feel that as he studies these things, he becomes an expert, and then encourage him to get all puffed up in his pride. And then the demons will have done their job to guarantee his demise in the Father's house, which is, of course, the devil.